whose work is more tapped into meaning and purpose are more engaged. Fact. So there's like a lot of benefits on the individual level and the organizational level to get people talking and thinking and reflecting about this stuff. We live in a society, we live in a world where most of us are part of these organizations, and there's like a pretty straightforward path, right? I start here and I get here. And so we go through life, and the measuring stick is the path. And tapping into purpose and meaning are a way of like not just jumping on the treadmill to get onto not the treadmill, but sort of jumping on the moving walkway to the predetermined path, but saying, what do I care about? What am I really freaking good at? What do I choose to learn more about, not because someone told me to, but because I care about it?
What's up, Tuli? How's it going?
Hey, Alma. How's it going?
Oh, it's going well because I'm in California and there's sun.
Oh, so am I. It's great to be in the same state as you.
Yes, very nice. Temporary, but we're loving it. So today we're talking to Sarah Feely.
I'm a big Sarah Feely fan, so that's fantastic news.
I'm becoming more of a Sarah Feely fan after
That's
talking to her.
part of my goal.
She's
Part
great.
of my goal. And so will all of our listeners.
Yes.
What are we talking to her about?
We're talking about purpose and meaning at work. There's a lot to explore there, but I think she's quite passionate about this, and I learned a ton, so I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited, and I hope you all enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Beautiful Questions.
Okay. It's our great privilege to have my dear friend, Sarah Feely, on the podcast today. Hey, Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm awesome. I feel like I said this when I talked to you guys a few weeks ago. I feel like I'm amidst celebrities here because I've been a consumer and now I'm just great to be here.
Well,
She flatters us.
yeah, I mean, for anyone who's blessed enough to have parents, you know that you're always a celebrity in the eyes of your parents. So, I don't know. I don't think anyone else thinks of me as a celebrity, but and not even my parents if they're listening to this. So Sarah is just for our many listeners out there. I got to know Sarah in graduate school, and since we took some classes together, and since then we've become good friends. At least I consider her a good friend. To be determined what she considers me. And
That's plus one.
Sarah is both a coach and does some really cool work based in Dallas, Texas. And I'm hoping we could just open this conversation, Sarah, by you telling us just a little bit about your background, and maybe tell us a little bit about what got you interested in studying people in the workplace.
Big question. So COVID was a big pivot for me, but I'll take you back a little bit.
Yeah, take us back. We actually, shy of like what hospital you were born in, even though I'm sure that's an important detail. Like, I mean, it's really interesting to know a little bit about, hey, where are you from? What was your upbringing like? Yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about life narratives and the realization that life narratives are a real thing. I think it's completely appropriate to get into some, early stuff. So, I spent my life, I'm an only child. I spent my life in the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically Sunnyvale. And
Wait, Sarah, pause.
Yeah.
That's exactly where I am right now. I'm 2 blocks away. Yeah, I'm 2 blocks away from the See's Candy factory.
Yeah, wow. That's bringing me back. Yes. So Sunnyvale, born and raised. I spent my whole life like a real achiever. Like classic, all of this of course is in hindsight, like classic fixed mindset. Everyone tells me like I'm really good at sports and I'm really smart. And so like those must be just innate things. And so I spent my whole life in the Bay Area. I ended up playing basketball, just in general, but basketball were a huge part of my identity in a lot of ways that I ended up unpacking later. But I played competitive sports, basketball year round, starting when I was like in 8th grade. I ended up going to college on a basketball scholarship and played long story short, September 11th happened my senior year of high school. And I ended up going to a college that kept me close. And so I played for 1 year. It really wasn't, it really wasn't a fit for me, on lots of levels. And it was like this big, maybe 9-month long process of deciding I wanted to quit or retire, as I like to call it. And I was 19, 20, and I had spent my whole life identifying as something, this one thing. And it took me like 15 years to figure out how much was tied into that and how much I didn't deal with in my identity, leaving basketball behind. But so that was like 20. I graduated from college. I ended up getting into restaurant management with Hillstone Restaurant Group or Houston's Bandera, which is in Chicago. Amazing restaurant group. And I did that for about 10 years. And hospitality and restaurants, it wasn't that I loved restaurants. It's that to me, they were a total extension of sports. It was like highly intense, highly team oriented. Like guests are coming in the door. If you've ever seen The Bear, if you haven't seen The Bear, stop, see The Bear. I mean, it's like watching it is like PTSD because it's real. And there's something about it that to me is very much like a sports game.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I did that for almost 10 years. And there's a real pattern in my life of like, I burned out from that.
10 years is a solid wick, though. No?
Yeah. But I mean, I burned out of operations in 5 years. And then I stayed with the group for another few years. So I burned out of operations. And I think I burned out of basketball. I think I burned out of operations. And then I got into executive recruiting. And that's where I started really getting into talent. I worked for Korn Ferry, following Hillstone for 6 years. I started in executive recruiting and I pivoted to talent management. And I finally, at the age of like talking, Alma, we were talking about like, when am I going to feel like an adult? Like at about 33, I finally was like, oh, I think I like this people stuff. And it came to me, like I didn't find it. And it's no surprise that I'm here now. And we can maybe get to that in a moment. But anyways, right. So Korn Ferry, 6 years, COVID happens and I have my second child. Right. And I'm like, I've got a toddler at home. I've got a newborn and I'm like furloughed from my job.
Okay.
And I'm having this whole, like, I'm having all this anxiety. I'm seeing a therapist. I'm having health anxiety, like identity. My therapist was like, it sounds like you're having an identity crisis. So we're unpacking all the basketball stuff. And I don't want to go back to my job, but I've told myself I'm an achiever. Like I climb shit. Do people swear on this show? Can I swear on this show? Yeah. Climber. Hey, man. Yeah.
Taylor.
No, like
Over here.
here I am at 34, home with 2 kids. I've got nothing to climb. I've got no new achievement to get. And I don't know what I want to do. And my job has disappeared. And it was like, it was really hard for me. And there was a lot to unpack. But it was the nudge I needed to go to MSLOC, to sort of move up this people path, right, towards some sort of career with people and talent, and then get my coaching certificate, which none of it was the plan. But in hindsight, as I looked at sort of these nodes in my life, I realized there's a pretty cohesive story there when I unpack it. So I'll pause. I don't know. That's a long intro. You can edit it. You can chop it up.
No, I love it. And just to complete that, so can you describe a little bit more about the kind of coaching that you do now, and just in general, what it is that you're working on? All right. I was going to add another question to that, but that's too many questions at once.
Yeah. They tell us in like coaching 101, like one question at a time. And I'm like, but I just want to add another question.
To be told that many times. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that confluence of stuff brought me to the coaching I do now. So I do professional executive coaching, right? We work on developmental goals, and I get hired by organizations and individuals to somehow, make career progression or but what I wanted to talk about today, a retreat that I'm leading in a couple months, this is really about values and purpose alignment in work. Because for me, there was a real floating through life, and floating, maybe that doesn't do it a service, but I did what I was good at and I didn't do what I really loved. And then I'd find myself totally dissatisfied because I'd reached some achievement, which I thought was like the hallmark of success. And right, you sort of get that, like, talked about, like the dopamine hit you get from achievement,
Yeah.
and then it would dissipate. And I wasn't actually tied to what I really cared about. There were pieces of it, right? So back to your question, Tuli, a lot of my coaching on a one-on-one coaching level, but also from an organizational standpoint, is getting people to tie into their purpose, their strengths, what gives them meaning, and then use that to perform in their work.
Fantastic.
I have just going before we move forward with that, I have some curiosity around why you chose grad school. Could you
Yeah.
bring us to that moment of how you're in therapy, you're unpacking things?
Yeah.
What leads you to make that decision and like invest? I mean, we know how much Northwestern costs,
Yeah, right.
and a small decision. So
Yeah, no, not. Um, it's threefold. So I think one, it was a way of moving forward my career while having total flexibility with my kids. So it felt like I was progressing something while not having to really fully work. And I'm married and I've got the support of my husband. So like that should, that's what enabled me to be able to do this sort of financially, right?
Yeah.
Is that so there's that. Two, like I am an endlessly curious person. And so I have a passion for and faith in like education, and what you learn in school and the people you meet will be some incredible net positive and take me in some direction. And so it was faith in like education was a means to exploration. And then I think the last is, if I'm really honest, there's a little bit of like I don't know if it's like a performance proof, like for MSLOC talk, but I had plenty of people who were on, I'd ask their advice, hey, if I want to pursue this career path, do I need this degree? And people were like, hey, you're already at Corn Ferry. Like, no,
no.
just go with it. Other people who were like, if you want to get advanced in this, most people have masters and PhDs, go for it. And there was this other little part of me from an ego standpoint was like, oh, well, I'll get a Northwestern degree and people will think I'm legit. So,
Yeah.
Like,
I think
Yeah.
I think that's true for almost anyone that goes to do a master's at Northwestern on some level.
Yeah.
or any
Many people. I'll certainly speak for myself. It's for sure that I for sure could relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
But
And
Alma,
Alma,
thanks for
and Alma, I don't know if you could relate to that, but
I already said I could.
oh, you couldn't. You could relate to that. No, we could all relate to that. That's totally legit. It's totally legit.
It
So
was life changing. I mean, yeah, going to MSLSE really was.
so someone last week, one morning, I saw a friend of mine, and he came up to me, and he asked me the following question, and I now want to ask you that question that he asked me, which is, if you what is the ideal next project that you would have loved to be given, right? So if someone said, like work project, he was asking because, he was asking me for work purposes. And he wanted to understand like what really are the kinds of things that I'm interested in. And he wanted to understand what kind of organization I might be interested in working with, what kind of people, what might be my goals, what kind of questions might I ask. So maybe if you could describe either like a recent project that you worked on that is ideal, or if it doesn't exist, like what's that project that you have in mind that you're like, that's really the kind of work that I want to be doing?
Yeah. What an awesome question. I mean, you got a good friend asking you questions like that.
Well, I'm hoping it leads to some business, but anyway.
Yeah. So one answer, so I'm doing my own coaching thing, business, but I also joined a boutique firm. There's 4 of us, right? And it's Compassionate Leader Circle, and I talk about them on LinkedIn. And it's this group of us. We're taking IP from our founder, Laurel Donnellan, who's been trying out and successfully using IP for 20 plus years. And so I've gotten to take this and do a little bit, Julie, of what your question is, which is
Sarah, really
make,
quickly.
yeah,
Sorry. By IP, you are referring to intellectual property, right?
yes.
Okay.
intellectual
I want to make
property.
sure it was the right.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm throwing around jargon to sound really
So
cool.
you're saying that the founder has her own intellectual property and you're using that. Okay.
Yeah, I'm using it, and I get to add to it in my own way, but we've got really cool work we're doing with a Lead with Love program. So we're putting executives through a Lead with Love program. Um, the second model and curriculum is called Pause for Purpose. And so this is how I came upon joining CLC. I saw this stuff on the internet and I was like, this is my passion. Like, how do I work with these people? And here I am. And so truly the answer to your question is, I helped facilitate this Pause for Purpose program for Denver University seniors in September. This is the 6th year we've led DU seniors through a Pause for Purpose retreat. And I said, women, people really, but from my own personal experience, women in their 30s and 40s need this purpose content. And so I've put together a retreat with this intellectual property. It's a 12-part amazing framework getting into like your past, your present, and your future. Leveraging purpose to love your work. This is a dream of mine that I'm doing here in February down in Austin, Texas. And so it's a microcosm of the sort of the bigger, broader work I'd like to do, which is to help people feel empowered to love their work. And that's my purpose statement. And I think at least my professional purpose statement, which maybe we'll get to later, but it took me several years to figure out like, this is my work purpose, at least in this chapter of my life. And so the retreat is a way of getting people to like very intensely get into this cool, 48-hour pause of helping them rediscover or love their work. I would love to take it on a bigger scale where I can help maybe, people who can't afford to take 48 hours and fly to Austin and do a retreat. But I think if people can find purpose and passion in their work, leveraging their strengths and that which they find meaningful, we're going to have people not only performing better, as the data says, but you're going to have people who have a lot left energy left over in their lives for, bringing back to their homes. So I don't know. Is that like a long-winded way of saying I'm in some way doing this dream work, which is taking this super awesome purpose content and helping people sort of work it into their lives.
Yeah.
No, that is really good. You've been mentioning purpose and meaning, and while I'm sure I have a working definition and Tuli has a working definition, I don't know if all of us are on the same page. Could we like
Yeah.
I definitely want to hear some examples of why
Yeah.
you just made a very strong statement, right? Like you have like kind of a thesis. And I don't disagree with it, but we're gonna definitely want some examples. But before we even get to the examples, could you define like how are you defining and within this context
Yeah.
purpose and then meaning?
Yeah. So I think meaning, at least as I think about it and how I've read about it, meaning is a little bit more specific. It is your why. Why do you do something? And that's a subjective perceived value.
That would sound like purpose to me, but that's not
Well,
purpose.
purpose, as CLC and I work with it, is the impact you want to have.
Oh.
So my purpose, like, there are things that I find meaningful. And often they tie together to this greater idea of the purpose or the impact I want to have in the world. Right. So I want to empower people to love their work. That's my professional purpose statement, at least on this draft of it. I'm always iterating, as I think we all should.
Of course.
Right.
And there are things that I do in my life that provide meaning that are tied into that. Right. And for example, my personal purpose statement is to raise kind, curious, and confident children. That's the impact I want to have on them in the world. There are things that I do with them that provide me deep meaning that will tie into that purpose statement. So that's what I think about those two things.
I'm wondering, Alma, tell me what you think of this, but I'm wondering if it would be fun for Sarah to walk either me or you or both of us through one of these exercises, and for us to be a little, for us to try this out.
Racy.
That's
I don't know.
In the not as
No.
burn a bridge person.
well, no. This is where the work gets hard. This is not like, oh, journal in your journal for 5 minutes and figure it out.
Yeah, that's fair.
All of this, if you really want to do it right, and I think the whole world would benefit from figuring out their 2 to 3 values. This is all rooted in understanding your values. Because you can do retrospectives where you say, you know what, that provides me tremendous meaning. But if you really want to know what they're rooted in, that's like really core to you, it's understanding your values.
Okay, great. So let's bring this down to earth for a second. How do I, if you ask me what are my values, I can list a whole bunch of things. I value kindness. I value beauty. I value love. I value Judaism. I don't know. I value lots of things. Diversity. How do I narrow that down to 2 or 3? What do I do?
Yeah. It's
Or
hard,
maybe through
but
a story.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah,
And do the
yeah. I mean,
exercise on him. Maybe give us an example of someone you've helped uncover that.
and Alma, I wonder if you've touched on this in your like narrative storytelling. But oftentimes if you say, here's a list of 100 values, people pick like 20, and the vast majority of them are aspirational,
Sure.
right? Like if I had more time, I would do X because I value X, and you get more time and you never do that. Okay, sorry, it's not a value. You wish, but it's not a value. And so when I do this, most of the people that I, like take on as coaches, and the coaches who were listening to this, it's like people come to you with a presenting issue, right? This thing they really want to work on, and you like dig around a little bit and you realize it's rooted in like major underlying mindsets or, sort of
Yeah.
some real self-awareness things. And so a lot of my clients, we end up getting into a values exercise or exercises if they haven't done them yet, because they will bring you to your, they'll give you your true compass. And the way we do that, to get really tactical, is I would take you through like storytelling, right? So tell me about a time, right?
Mhm.
Julie, tell me about a time you felt truly content and at peace. And you're going to tell the story, and we're going to take notes. Who was there? What were you, so this question,
You was hoping I would get to.
do you want to tell us a story?
Sure. Well,
Yeah, a time you were truly content and at peace.
A time I was truly content and at peace. I mean, the first place my mind goes to is like when I'm out in nature or something, like.
What are you doing?
Well, okay. Yesterday, I'll tell you. Yesterday, I was content and at peace. Or at least I felt that for a moment when I was at the beach and just you know, watching my son play.
Mm. Who else was there? Was there anyone else there, like, central to the story?
You know, just us two, and then other people at the beach. But again, maybe are you looking for something more in a work context? Because
No, not at all.
okay,
Not at all. Because our values are core. No, there's no such thing as work values and life values. It's all the same drivers, all the same things core to us. So what I would do, Tuli, is we would talk about that story, that in more detail, and we'd start to crystallize. There's something in there that is very important to you.
can I just tell you an issue with that?
Yeah.
I'm now that I said it, because it was the first thing that popped into my mind. But now that I said it, I'm questioning myself. And the reason why I'm questioning myself is because, there's a difference. Kahneman talks about this a lot. There's a difference between the experiencing self and the remembering self. He's got a great TED
Yeah.
talk about this.
Mhm.
Just brilliant.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that the way I'm remembering the encounter at the beach, and we were there for sunset and it was so beautiful, is rather different than the way I actually experienced it. I'm not sure if if you would ping me at the time and say, "Hey, Tuli, are you feeling content and at peace?" I'm not sure that I actually did. Maybe I did.
I mean, but there is something in your choice that this conjures up that is reflective of something of deep value to you. It doesn't mean you're recollecting it the way you experienced. Like when I did this exercise, I have this great memory. It's like um of my kids and me, and we're walking in Colorado and we're exploring things. And it was a real representation as I did. And by the way, this is one anecdote I'm telling you to we do like 5 of these. You do 10 of these. You start to, there's real cohesiveness in like the story. Eventually,
Alma. Oh, poor Alma. It's fine with this, Alma, by the way. It's just Alma's, but I'm letting you tell my stories.
I'm thinking about our listeners.
Enough story.
Our listeners.
The listeners want more Thuli stories. They keep asking for more stories from me.
You're right. The last comments have really been about that.
This has just been
Julie stories? No, 0 negative.
It's not untrue. We just have no way to verify it.
we just don't know.
We should actually. We have not collected that data.
Anyway, so how did we get to this part of the conversation?
I'll tell you, because we're just trying to understand how this works, right? So
Yeah.
we were Alma was asking you for a definition of purpose and of meaning, and then we started talking about values. So now we're talking about, well, how do you actually get to understand what a person's values are? Yeah.
Yeah, and so
You're saying that you do about 10 stories.
you can do 10 stories, and then you can do a benefit is to talk about real low points, right? Where you felt completely unlike yourself, and the typical conclusion is that those low points are where you are in situations or with people that are opposed to your values, and you start sort of finding out that when you are in scenarios that don't align with your values, you end up feeling really negative. There's really negative emotions tied to that. But I ended up getting to my values are challenge, authenticity, and exploration. I'm sorry, and curiosity. And it was through like unpacking these real stories where I felt most content or aligned with myself, at peace, at my best. And then when you get those values, I mean, well, I realized that the experiences that I was having that were of significant meaning always included those values.
Hmm.
And then you say to yourself, well, how do I make sure that to incorporate these values so I can do more meaningful stuff? And this is where you get into purpose and meaning at work. I mean, there's plenty of people who don't have their dream job. We've talked about this, Tuli. But you might say, what's this aspirational idea of like having the most purposeful work and meaning in their work? I'm just trying to get a paycheck. Yes, but, or yes, and you can still find nuggets and facets in your work that tie into strengths and values that will allow you to find meaning in your work. And it's finding that, and it's mining your work for that, that provides dividends in terms of engagement, energy. I mean, health benefits. It sort of goes on and on.
Yeah. I love the story work. And I've done with clients, I've done like, I guess not necessarily mining for values, but for paradigms or beliefs, like beliefs about a certain thing. So I've done it specifically like with leadership. Um, and yes, I think finding at least 10 stories, some positive, some negative, et cetera. Like if you can get more, that's even better, et cetera.
Yeah.
And analyzing them. So I get where you're coming with all of that. But I also think another part of my brain comes in, and I know coaches who use Enneagram a lot, which supposedly like talks about your values, your true values, or gets to your core values and the core things you avoid because you find them.
Oh, yeah. I love Enneagram too. I'm not certified, but I love it. It's so
And then there's Hogan, right? The Hogan assessment that has the thing of values and supposedly also, gets how do you say this? That it just like gets through
the derailers.
No, the values one, right? That cuts through all of your aspirational stuff and gives you what you actually value. And it's very hard for people to look at that Hogan list and be like, oh, is that really true?
I know that sort of, and it's like, oh, is that really me? Yeah, that's
And
me.
Strengths Finders, and there's the Strengths Finder 2.0 guy. He talks about like the red thread. I'll look up his name.
I don't know that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think is similar to
Marcus Buckingham or whatever.
Thank you, Marcus Buckingham. I've seen him live, and he uses Messi and Messi's left foot and dribbling and etc. And how, but basically his big thesis is very similar to yours. Like, even if you don't have your dream job, because most of us do not over the face of the planet, right? You need to like the idea is to mine your work and your tasks to find that red thread, right? Which is maybe his metaphor for purpose, and then finding meaning if you can pull that throughout your life or follow it or whatever. However, but my point is there's all those tools, right? And you're using story primarily. Do you complement with any of with whichever tool like that or assessments, or how do you or what is the value? What's your case for using the story method, which could be longer than just taking an assessment or whatever, right? To help people mine for their values.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm also Hogan certified, and so I've used the Hogan quite a bit. But it's also like a pretty robust. I mean, some of these are like really robust assessments. I'm only certified in Hogan. I use that. I think it's great. I find personal stories and depending how much time someone wants to spend in this space, to be a way to do it. But I'm also like a big assessment person, so I don't know if that.
I want to answer that question too, even though the question was geared towards Sarah. But I actually,
Please, Julie.
I'll tell you why. No, I'll tell you why, because I was thinking of a similar question. And my question was, Sarah, you described your values as curiosity,
Authenticity.
Challenge and authenticity.
right, challenge, authenticity.
Yeah.
And you said them, and I was thinking to myself, oh, duh. I mean, I know you for a few years. Of course, that's the way I would describe you. Like, yes, 100%. Totally agree. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe you should have just asked me, and
Yeah.
and I don't mean that literally, but right, of course there are, right, like the 360 assessments. There's ways of asking peers, right, of like, and that's helpful. But then what I realized is that it wouldn't make a huge difference to you. I mean, it would, but for you, it's actually doing the work, right? Doing the work and coming up with those stories and actually discovering those things about yourself are so much more powerful than hearing it from a friend or even from a spouse or from a parent. So there is something I think extremely powerful about going through this process.
Right.
That I'm guessing. Is that would you agree with that?
Oh, well, I asked the question setting it up as a trap so that someone would say that. So yes. not. I wanted to know if anyone else, if you thought that, because you've been doing the exercises, Sarah,
Yeah.
with people, and you know that assessments exist, which could technically take the place of the story work. So, yeah, do you agree with what Tuli said?
Yeah, I wish I had thought of it myself. I mean, right? I do think there's beauty and real fulfillment in doing the work. Maybe that's the challenge lover in me. Like, I'm doing the work. It needs to be, challenging. Any value overused, right, is a potential derailer. Like challenge and burnout, right? There's the threat. But I do think doing the work is really, I mean, I also was at a time like sometimes people don't come to this work. I don't know if you all experience this until they're like, I was at a real low point. And I was like, I gotta figure my shit out.
Mm.
And so when I was had a newborn baby at home and I was working 55 whatever hours a week and I wasn't doing the work then. I had to really carve out space for it. So, yeah, I mean, yes, it's doing the work. That's also really hard. That's why I think you should find a coach because you're like, man, I'm paying for a coach. I'm sitting here paying for this time. Let's get into it. 'Cause I think it's really hard to do it on your own.
Yeah.
I don't know if you all have experienced that.
It is, one, to have the discipline, two, there's power in reading them aloud or analyzing with someone else, right? Um, and I would just add that even if you're going through your stories, your personal stories and moments, trying to find values or whatever it might be, depending on the angle, uh, what is also powerful is that you end up learning more things about yourself, even
Yes.
outside of, because stories are so complex, right? That's why I think there's narrative therapy and narrative coaching, because even though it is harder work or more challenging, and then obviously like narrative therapy or narrative coaching, they'll bring in, what do you want to do with this story? You think the way that you told this story to yourself as a 10-year-old is still valid? Might there be other angles? Might there be another way of seeing it? Was there something that you missed? Very Inside Out, right? Like the moment in Inside Out, the first one, where where Joy finally sees that sadness was always a key part of that memory, but
Mhm.
because she avoided sadness, uh,
Yeah.
from a 7, right? And an Enneagram 7, yes, for those who don't,
I avoid sadness too.
Me,
Sadness.
yes, we avoid,
Yeah.
we have,
7 too. Did we ever talk about that?
oh yeah, maybe we did. Yeah.
What I
You, or any other number except mine.
Not like's really involved.
I'm a you closeted 8. Power baby.
What's an 8?
Closeted 8.
What's an hour?
No, but what is that your number? You're an 8?
I'm an 8. Like power dynamics. Um there are some not so great 8s in the world. You can Google them. But listen, I'm a well-adjusted 8, but I go to 7, and so
Okay.
7 wing.
You
And so I it's really hard for me to deal with emotions like sadness. And to your point, Alma, not to derail us,
Yeah.
it's the reframing, of narratives that can be so empowering.
And finding that, like, if all of us had, so tying it back into the case for why doing the story work, and then maybe complementing with an assessment, sure. But
Mhm.
doing the story work first and foremost is because I think that moment in Inside Out is a really good case, right? It is an analyzing a story. Of course, it's shown visually, of the little ball of, this is when Riley.
Did like last night, Alma?
No, it's just that. I don't
Sure.
remember.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
The moment where she like
Hockey? Was
she
it?
lost a hockey tournament or whatever, or she lost a shot, right? But then her parents come and console her, and Joy had always focused on, this is a happy memory, right? And then didn't realize that her parents had consoled her before. I might be butchering this.
That it was that the happiness stems from the sadness.
First, a moment of sadness where her parents
From
were
first
consoling her,
sadness.
right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't know, that's just a good I think that's just a good example of how powerful it can be to revisit the stories that you've told yourself and about your identity and decide, how good of a narrator, was I really an omniscient narrator in this
Yeah. Never.
this memory?
There's no objective truth. There's only subjective reality, right? And our memories are the same.
Right.
And our
so
narratives are the same.
for a working human or a leader, right? What is why is it important to take the time to do this type of work as opposed to not and just doing your work and going through your performance reviews and doing your professional development stuff? Like, why take out the time to do this
Yeah.
deeper work of finding your values and then maybe purpose and meaning
Yeah.
in your
I
opinion?
mean, yeah. I mean, I think the values work are sort of foundational to understanding purpose and meaning, right? So if we get to the purpose and meaning part,
Go for it.
yeah. No, I don't want to just spew off data around like the benefits of work, purpose, and meaning, but um, there's a lot of research and there's a lot of um, great writing around living into your purpose as a form of authenticity. And we perform better. We are happier. Um, we strive for goals in a more vigorous way.
Yeah.
When they're tied to a sense of meaning. It's like, right. So we can all, um, chase is sort of like a loaded word, right? But we can all sort of go after the achievement that's in front of us. And I think it's very easy. Like we live in a society, we live in a world where most of us are part of these organizations and there's like a pretty straightforward path, right? I start here and I get here. And so we go through life and the measuring stick is the path. And tapping into purpose and meaning are a way of like not just jumping on the treadmill to get onto not the treadmill, but sort of jumping on the moving walkway to the predetermined path, but
Yeah.
saying, what do I care about? What am I really freaking good at? What do I choose to learn more about? Not because someone told me to, but because I care about it. And if we can tie a little bit more of that into, and this is where we get into some of the work I do with organizations, which is how do you make goals and work a little bit more tied into purpose and meaning so that people can live out that which is more authentic to them, more inspiring to them, and have it be sort of a really a more sort of self-derived path, right? Than just I'm on the moving walkway of my organization.
Cool. Could you give us an
Is that
example of Yeah, no, that makes sense. Could you give us an example
Yeah.
of a client or a team, whatever is easiest, that you've seen them do that?
Yeah. We work for a client. We had a client in the energy, well, in clean power. And um we did a 10-week program within ERG. It was really cool. An employee resource group.
Yeah.
And we took them through in large part this 12-part purpose framework.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of like, okay, so I've got like these strengths and I've got this sense of purpose, but like, what do I do about it? And we say, well, how do you live your purpose in your work? Like, let's talk about it. Let's have conversations with leaders, right? Because you bring leaders into the conversation. You give people the tools and the voice to say, these things are important to me. And we haven't talked about them before. I want to do more of this work in my work. And so we did this 10-week program where we got people to say like, here are my strengths. Here's what I love. Boss, here's my purpose statement. I have some ideas about how I want to incorporate these things that are meaningful to me into my work. And it was like incredibly, I mean, right. And this is not like, we're not saying like, hey, work should be a place for someone to work out all their, hopes and dreams that aren't ancillary to the business. But there is a way of someone bringing like the core them to get creative about how they bring those values and drivers into their work. And so the end of it was where they brought their manager into the dialogue and had a set of things that interested them, their purpose statement, and how they could marry them into either performance reviews or set goals. It was like really cool.
How did managers react? And like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
how did
Well,
those conversations go?
I mean, it takes real buy-in for this. I mean, if you want to make like organizational shifts, to say like the metaphor is like clean fish, dirty pond, right? Like you can get like this amazing cohort of people
Yeah.
and they're all stoked and psyched and, inspired, and you throw them back into the pond, typically with their direct supervisors, and it just falls flat. And so I think, it's like, this is not a groundbreaking statement, but organizations can invest in their people all they want, but if they don't have direct supervisor or people leader buy-in, this stuff won't really travel the way it can and should. And so part of us kicking off a 10-week program with clients is to get direct supervisors of the people who are taking our program in on the thing, in on the purpose and the objectives and the content and all that. So your answer to your question, I mean, that's sort of where we left off, right? Here, go forth and co-create with your manager. But at least we knew going into this that the direct supervisors were privy and hopefully bought in to the
How
exercise.
did you get buy-in from those direct supervisors?
I mean, I think that we left that to the organization. I mean, we leave that to the organization, but if I was to do it my way, and that's not how I would always have people managers take leadership development courses before, not courses, right? The curriculum prior to this was specifically to individual contributors, mostly who were part of an employee resource group. So to me, the buy-in should always come from people direct, supervisors, but it didn't happen that way.
So it sounds like
So you're how, Alma, I'm not answering. I'm not answering.
Yeah, good. So it sounds like this process of like of creating, meaning for people, especially meaning around their work. It begins with understanding your values, which as you talked about, at least one way is through narratives and a bunch of different ones. And it almost sounds like on the other, once you go through this process, you're working a little bit on, on job crafting, on trying to figure out, okay, well, how can I craft my job to fit, or can I? Or maybe I need to switch jobs or whatever it is. Or is there a way? Or maybe I need to do something mentally. What about in the middle, right? There must be some other things, in this 12-part framework that are worth highlighting, for how one develops a sense of meaning in work. And it occurred to me also just, within your line of questioning before, Alma, that I think that one of the things that this could really accomplish is just, give people more of a sense of humanity, right? The difference between humans doing something and a robot doing something is that hopefully we could do it with some sense of purpose, right? Hopefully with some sense. And it sounds to me that someone that's going through this process is, they're shifting off of autopilot, and they're now kind of they're trying to reclaim their authority, or their agency, right? It's almost a way of developing energy. So if we're starting with narratives, we're ending with some sort of change that is practical in the workplace. What's happening in the middle there? What are some other parts of this framework that you might want to talk about when it comes to meaning?
Yeah. Well, sorry. Yeah, to cut you off at the end there. First take a step back. because the framework is sort of leading up to your purpose almost comes at the end. It's like, we look at our past and our life experiences. How do we get here? Why do even the relationship that we look at, like the relationship your parents or the people around you who raised you, what was their relationship with work and the sense of finance and abundance, and how does money or the certain constraints we tell ourselves about our work, how did those form? So anyway, there's a lot of unpacking before we even get to purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
But I think it's important because purpose can sound like this big sort of theoretical high level thing. But there's like 3 levels of purpose that you can, one of which you can tap into in like the day to day, the everyday. And so there's, so at the sort of, you think of it like concentric circles, right? The very outside of the circle is like the pro-social benefits, right? Like I'm working on, this is the fun, easy stuff to talk about. Like I'm working on vaccines for malaria and sending them to Africa, or, right. So the big pro-social benefits. Then the next rung in is me living my purpose. And, maybe that's using storytelling to X, or maybe it's, Tuli, your curiosity and intellectual, whatever, to do this.
That's
right?
the values piece, that second rung, or not?
This is all levels of purpose. So, right, big pro-social purpose, my sort of self-purpose. And then the inner circle is like, what's the purpose that I'm doing right here in this work I'm doing? And I don't mean like changing, like Tuli, like you put on 2 events this weekend at work, right?
Yes.
And you probably spent a lot of time doing tasks that were related to the purpose of putting on killer event for your organization.
Right.
And some of the work is helping people understand how the most sort of minute tasks they're doing are tied in to getting crap done for the business. And so a lot of this is just saying, hey, how are you leveraging your strengths on a day-to-day basis to move the ball up the field inch by inch? And like, it seems sort of minuscule, but there's a fair amount of data tied to this idea that when people understand the role they play in making progress towards something of benefit to an organization, it actually it's energizing.
Yeah.
So there's some of that in there too. And I'm re-listening to a phenomenal book called The Progress Principle. Are you familiar with it? It's about
Familiar, but I don't.
Tell us.
Stephen Kramer and Teresa. If it's Amabile or Amabile, they do incredible research around creativity, and they've coined this term inner work life, right? All the stuff that's up here throughout the day to day. And they did this incredible in-depth study about the greatest influencers on someone's inner work life. And the data, sort of a resounding, the number one driver for someone having a positive inner work life was making progress towards meaningful work.
Yeah.
Right. So go ahead, Alma.
Well, bells are going off because 2 days ago in this very office in Sunnydale, connected to you without knowing it. As I was having lunch, I just looked for a TED Talk, and I came across Adam Grant, Tuli, Adam. This one I had not seen, and this was published in 2021. Remember when all of that stuff was coming out about languishing and the
Well, that for that okay, living out of bed that he wrote in the New York Times.
the TED Talk, right? And he draws on research, which I would.
You want me to give you the word by word repeat of the case? No, I'm just joking. I really cannot. I'm just overplaying my fandom. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
But you are a true fan, and no one doubts it. Anyhow, like, just want to validate you. So, on the 3 things that he talks about to get over, based on research, right? are actually exactly kind of what you're talking about. The first one is mastery. I just kind of was memorizing it. So mastering a skill, and he used playing Mario Kart with his, I think it was Mario Kart, something. Yeah, with his family online and in the house while they were in COVID. So he was like, it doesn't have to be super, deep, right? This wasn't even work related, but they were all languishing. And one of the ways that they got themselves out of languishing was masteries. You have to get better at a
But
good
something.
at something. Yeah. And then the middle one was mindfulness. So I think being present about it, like actually focused when you're on it. Da, da, da. And then the third one was ding, 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 meaning. There must be, it must, and the way he used it actually sounds a little bit more like purpose in the way you've defined it. But anyways, like meaning that is tied to some of your core values or your core kind of purpose. And so for him playing Mario Kart with his family was like keeping up relationships and um being connected to his family, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, 100%. And
And then
actually,
energizing, that's exactly, sorry, that's what kicked it off. You said this can be actually really energizing. And he was actually presenting it as a formula, as the anecdote, or sorry, antidote. Thank you. The antidote to languishing, which is a lethargical state of meh, right?
yeah.
And so this is a way to get energy. So that's really fascinating.
I
wanna-
love that you brought that in. I mean, I'm sure there's so much of this is interconnected. And Julie, your question was, okay, like, uh, what's in the middle of all this, right? Like this idea of like, I mean, is it sort of like I start with my values and I get in touch with what's important to me, and I can have these conversations with my boss, but like, I don't know, maybe I'm making an assumption about your question. But is the question, so like, how do I make my life better? How does all this stuff tie into my day-to-day life? Or was that not your question?
That wasn't, but that's a great question that I was gonna ask. That I was gonna ask at some point too, um, because one of the hardest things in the world is to actually change. Right? It's one thing
Yeah.
to know something, but to actually then make change is very difficult. So, yeah, by all means, it's a great thing to talk
Wow.
about.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer to this, but no, I think, when we talk about purpose and meaning, we're really getting to intrinsic motivators. Um, and knowing what intrinsically motivates you is the difference between, living a life of or work where you're checking the boxes and, reading that extra article because it's fascinating to you, or having that extra conversation with someone because it's like you're so excited you want to talk about this thing. Um, and so there's kind of three. I'm going to take us away from the question and then bring us back in. I promise. But there's some body of research around intrinsic motivators being in three main buckets: autonomy, right? The ability to have some control over the work you do or your output, or and the second is competence, and that's Alma exactly, I think, what Adam Grant's like getting at, which is like people want to be good at something. What was the word he used? But it wasn't competence.
Mastery.
Mastery. I mean, it's in this world of like, when we feel good at, I mean, it's like when you feel good at something, um, it's a real intrinsic motivator, and you generally become better at things that you care about, right? So this find your values and sort of double down into those, because from them usually competence grows. And then the third intrinsic motivator is this idea of relatedness, wanting to be a part of something, no man's an island, right? Wanting to be part of something greater than yourself, whether you like to, work on your own or not. This sense of being connected to humans in some way is really important. And so a lot of this high level purpose work that we talk about in like this sort of really, or people can think about it in this really sort of grandiose theoretical way, can be brought down to daily tasks And there's a great HBR article on it, and it's called, man, I'll send you guys a link, but it's basically like day-to-day meaningfulness, which is identifying your strengths and doing more things that you're good at, and choosing to do more things that you're good at and that you enjoy. I'll give an example of that. Doing things that bring in other people taps into relatedness, right? So it might not be a project where you're collaborating with people, but if you go to lunch and you talk about it, if you want to bring someone into a meeting, if you want to co-build something, that shows to bring in more sort of a daily sense of meaning. And then what they talk about in the progress principle is people feeling like they're making micro wins towards the work they're doing.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll pause there, but and so there's all sorts of really, like, we coach people on like daily ways to do this. And to your point, Julie, which is, well, God, changing is really hard. It's simple things like simple, not so simple things like, I'm really into curiosity, and I'd like to write a white paper on something. Maybe that's too big, right? I want to learn more about X. And so it's finding someone in the firm who knows about X and having a conversation with them. Like, it might seem mundane, but you get out of that conversation with that person, and it can be thrilling, And so I think it's really about, you use the word agency. This is all about tapping into things and having agency around, drivers, interests, and passions.
So is part of the work that you do also helping people kind of break down their big goals and ideals into very, very bite-sized and tiny little tasks that they can start doing so they could start feeling small wins?
Yeah, 100%. Yes.
Mm.
Small wins. Thank you. You just very concisely summed it up beautifully.
He's good at synthesizing, right?
He's synthesizing. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, creating new habits, doing anything new is about small wins. But small wins towards meaningful, right? It's like the key word here is towards meaning. You can't
Yeah.
fake meaning. And so, for example, I kept wanting to go camping with my kids. Okay. But camping with kids is not really fun. And there's like never a good time.
For the parent.
And
Right.
for the parents, yeah. For the kids, it's great. And at the end of the year, it would be like winter time, and I'd be like, "Man, Peter, we didn't take Quinn camping," and then Reed came along. We didn't take Reed camping, and then Avery was a newborn, and like, we're still not camping. And I was like, "Why the hell do I want to go camping so much?"
Yeah.
And I realized that camping tied into tremendous areas of value and meaning for me. Right? It's like it's challenging. It's like authentic time together. And I'm not doing it in a course, like a luxury resort, because there's something in me that likes the challenge and sort of the discomfort in it, but to maybe some people's chagrin. But I created a goal in 2024 to do 5 family camping trips. And I did that. I sort of backed in. I know we just
Were you going 0 to 5? 0 to 5?
went 0 to 5. No, we went 1. We did 1 time last year. We went 1 to 5.
Oh.
But I backed into the goal. And this is like where there's, we don't have the time for this, but there's this virtuous cycle between goals, meaning, and purpose.
Oh.
Yeah.
Can you sign for that?
I can make the time for it, right? Which is, I had done this work.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I had done this work, and I knew that, like, I just know I love camping, and you don't always have to unpack it, but because
Right.
I had done the work to know my values and be like, oh, dude, it totally makes sense that I love camping. I love exploration. I love like nature. I love the unstructuredness of it. It worked into my narrative. It's like the red thread. Like camping totally makes sense. And I always want to take my kids camping, but it's really hard, right? But then I realized that like this purpose statement, this thing I have around what I want to do with my kids and my family, this vision I have for us, camping plays into that really beautifully. And, we start making these decisions for our kids like, oh, he's going to do piano lessons. And then we're going to do 5 sports. And then he's 7. So I've really got to introduce him to X, Y, and Z before it's too late. And you start like filling up your kid's schedule. And then you go, wait, what's my purpose statement, Sarah? I want to raise curious, kind, confident kids. Cut half of these activities out and let's freaking go camping.
Wow.
And so, I mean, like I'm sort of doing the Cliff's Notes, right? It's not, but I said, okay, these times we spend camping, like I'm not the difference between your experienced self and your remembering self. I remember them a lot fondly than I feel 5 a.m. when it's like Avery's crying. But there's tremendous meaning that I derive and that Peter and I derive through these camping trips that are tied to our values, to my sense of purpose. And so the goal of the 5 camping trips was not arbitrary. It was directly tied into meaning and purpose. Right? So you've got this trifecta, right? And so again, these are my personal goals. Not every work goal can be self-serving in this way. But this idea that like, I've just hit these 5, I hit my 5. The journey of getting there was the point, right? It's not like, oh, it felt great to do the 5 and like it sucked getting there, right? So I set these goals tied to my purpose and meaning, and it's further reinforced that I was doing them for the right reason because they were resoundingly meaningful to me. And when I say virtuous cycle, as you have goals that align to your meaning and purpose, and you're living those things, you become more inclined, and it is more solidifying to then sort of continue to create goals that are tied to purpose and meaning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, meaning so even when you're doing it, in other words, when you find almost small ways or different ways to live your values and to do them, and that's gonna make you do it in more ways.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much. Yeah. Because it feels right and it feels authentic doing it. And so when we talk to organizations about this, getting people to understand purpose and meaning, and in it, this whole bucket of other stuff, right? There's really like passions, strengths and superpowers, their authentic self, right? So purpose and meaning is like a sort of a catch-all to some very core things.
Yeah.
When you get people to understand that, and you can incorporate some of that into goals, the data shows, right? People have a lot more energy in striving towards those goals, and they reach them more regularly. And we don't have to talk about it here fully because I'm going to drop the word engagement, and that is like that's a whole like Pandora's box of just stuff. But people whose work is more tapped into meaning and purpose are more engaged. Fact.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of benefits on the individual level and the organizational level to get people talking and thinking and reflecting about this stuff.
Right, right. I just pulled up, recently I went to a little talk, hosted by a friend who works at OC Tanner. I don't know if you know this company. They work on, employee recognition as one of
Oh,
the
yeah.
big means to improve employee engagement. And they have a research and development arm. and they do a really, really big global culture report. Speaking of specifically organizational culture, not
Yeah.
other cultures, right? And they do it across
Yeah.
60 countries, and they have all these stats and everything. So I just pulled up really quick the executive summary, and it was really fascinating because, um, according to their research, which they do year on end, and well, you can look at their methodology. So when it comes to engagement and like a healthy organizational culture, they have 6 core elements. I'll just talk about 2 because they relate to this. So employee sense of purpose is number 1, and employee sense of success, which you can also understand as progress, right? Progress maps however we want to.
Oh.
Yeah. Competence. Of course, appreciation is in there, leadership is in there, opportunity, blah, blah. But employee sense of purpose year after year keeps being number 1 as like 70, I think it's the 2025 report says 73%, right, of
Wow.
employees say that their engagement, and it also it it has questions underneath that, but
Yeah.
that sense of purpose, of their own purpose and their purpose within the organization, and that the organization has a purpose that is actually meaningful to them,
Yes.
right, affects to the level of 73%, like how
Yeah.
engaged they aren't. So there is, and then sense of success on the personal side is like 69%, blah, blah. So these are really high numbers, and obviously they're not the only ones researching this stuff, but I wanted to give you at least one number because
Yeah, I love it.
it is really reflected in, and these are also, they take into account uh, the a big, huge part of our world right now, the population of the world, who are working, but they're not working behind a desk. They're not white collar workers. They're not highly educated. So they actually, um, they're considering that it's, I think the number is somewhere around more than 80%, 85%, right, of the world, of the working world, not in the
Mm.
US, but in the globally are not behind a desk. They're doing some other type of
Yeah. Yeah.
work, right? So even
Incredible.
taking into consideration that, not just kind of our world of like master's degrees and, do a lot of thinking. We get paid for doing a lot of thinking and a lot of analyzing and a lot of
Yeah.
whatever. So
Thanks for sharing that. People always love data that reinforces their point of view. That's
Yeah.
but I think it's hard because I think, and especially if you think, well, how's this work for more blue collar workers? I think that's
yeah. Well, we actually in our that we were thinking about a question, right, Tuli, of okay, beautiful, but like who can everyone really afford to think about purpose and meaning in work?
yeah. And I think it's like yes and yes, but there are really tactical ways of getting this stuff into your life. Um, there's a great example. I'm gonna botch this example, but it's like there's a guy who's a bus driver, and his school kids, like maybe not his dream job, but he felt tremendous pride in being, and one of his main drivers was community. And so he created this community on his bus where he put kids in leadership roles and he had kids doing activities on the bus. I mean, these kids were not just like, staring out the window. He had created this little community on his bus where kids had responsibilities and they were like, I'm going to botch the details. But here was someone who's like, listen, I'm a bus driver, but this piece of me is I can't let it go and I'm going to live it out on this bus.
Right.
And so I think that there are ways to think about, again, like I keep talking about strengths and competence. Getting people to identify what they're really naturally good at and helping them get good at it, no matter what it is, no matter what the job, whether you love it or not, there's going to be something you're going to be good at. and leaning into it. But I do think it's like, I think there's a really practical question here. And truly, maybe this gets back to your earlier question, which is, Sarah, like, if you could do anything, what's the hope and the dream? Since I'm really bought into this whole purpose and meaning and really the positive psychology school of coaching, how do we bring this to the masses? How do we bring this to people who aren't in a place of doing, white collar desk work?
Right. Well, look, if you think of like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I know that, that's the question. So of course, if someone doesn't, if someone is struggling to feed their family, it's very difficult for them to think about anything else or to feed themselves. And that is that's just obvious. It's actually, and maybe it's not so obvious. It's actually important for us to always remember that, right? Someone who's, um, that it's difficult. It's difficult to think about anything else. But there is a place where you want to feel a sense of community, a sense of belonging. You want to self-actualize, and these things are important. These things are important. I agree. No matter what kind of work you're doing, and I think that it is interesting to think about this. And you alluded to this before, but it is interesting to think about this with jobs that are more obviously kind of meaningful to people. Like, I don't know, someone who's a teacher, it's usually a pretty meaningful work. It's very obvious the meaning that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's very obvious, right? If you work for a charity, it's very obvious the kind of meaning that you might derive. And then there are places where it's a little bit more difficult. Maybe then there's like hospitality, where depending on what you're doing, it could be very obvious, or like a little bit less, right? Chefs love to say I'm feeding people, but I don't know. Does a dishwasher feel very connected to the hospitality? I don't know. And then there's, accountants and people in other service industries, and attorneys, and I don't. There's so many jobs out there, but I could see why this could be value on every level. I'm curious if there's anything else around this idea of helping people find meaning in their work and helping people find um, purpose in their work that we haven't really talked about yet, that you think is worth talking about just in for a few minutes in the remainder of our time.
I'm thinking we've touched on a lot. Um, Not necessarily. Random things come to mind. And you talked about
Okay. Sorry, were you about to answer?
one thing.
Okay, go ahead.
When you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a lot of research that says meaning has become a basic fundamental human need.
Mm.
And I think that's interesting because it sort of feels like it's a nice to have. It's like, no, it's a need to have. It's finding it a little bit. When you see that, I think one of my favorite books, I think everyone should read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah. Agree.
I mean, right? And talk about hierarchy of needs. Um, but I think that book really speaks to me and spoke to me as someone who was pursuing achievements because it was part of my identity and it's just what I always did. This idea that Frankl talks about that says happiness should not be pursued, it ensues from doing meaningful activities. And so, a lot of this conversation is getting people out of chasing something external to them, whether it's, extrinsic, right? Pay, whatever. And saying, what gives me meaning? Because if I do more of that, there's a far greater sense for happiness, for lack of a better word, for ensuing. So that's one thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
I love going really quickly back to the bus driver, even if you didn't have all the details. That's a really great example because, like, if we broke it down, what's his job description most likely, and how is he evaluated right? If we think about
Yeah.
maybe a lot of our listeners are in desk jobs, right? And they we get performance reviews or we get this and that, and we understand that this is, a way that it's done in corporations and in companies. So like literally, I think that probably he just has a pretty simple job description, right? Like you gotta pick them up and drop them off on time. They that's it, right?
That's it.
So like if he does that, he really doesn't have to do anything else. There's no motivation from the organization itself, be it the state, be it, I don't know, right? The company. There's no motivation to do anything else. And yet someone who is connected to their meaning and to their purpose, like him, um, reads between the lines. And then that's a short job description. Like, but I wonder what would happen if all of us, and maybe this is what you do, is like if we go through our job description, the one we've made or the one that was given to us,
Yeah.
and could read between the lines and see that there's actually a ton of space between those bullet points. I'm thinking that way because I'm job searching right now, so I'm reading tons of job descriptions.
Yeah.
And they've got like 18, 20 things, right? And one of the big activities is figuring out the space in between those bullet points.
Mm.
What type of space is there in between? Like, right? And can I fill that space with things that are actually even more important to me? What kind of wiggle room? I try to get an idea of like the bigger sense of purpose of the organization that wrote that job description. But maybe that's part of it, is that you also said the pursuit of happiness. That I love Frankel as well. It's funny because in the Constitution, which is a huge, it's just the Constitution, right? It's not the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. So the U.S. Constitution for people who were raised in the U.S.
Our international.
Yes. So people who are raised in the U.S. and had to learn about it and hear it and whatever. That's a common phrase. It's a deep narrative going back to stories. And yet in that is baked in this idea that you do have to pursue happiness, and within a capitalistic society that kind of translates as,
It's by the way, it's just for the record, it's from the Declaration of Independence.
see, I had a doubt. But thank you.
For good reason.
It even whichever document it is a hardcore part of
Yeah.
like a collective narrative about
Absolutely.
right this
Yeah.
country and etc. and what it means to be American. So I mean, we're kind of talking about really big things because it is going against the grain of this. You are not the only one, Sarah, who is without knowing bought into the idea that I am what I am worth what I achieve, or I am
Mhm.
what I do, right? Or yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, in its most succinct sense, and like you're exactly getting at it, Alma, which is instead of I am what I do what I am. Oh. And what I mean by that is maybe instead of letting the job description prescribe the actions, the agenda, it can be just a little bit of who am I? How am I going to live? How am I going to live my best self through this work? How will the work be an extension of me? It's a little bit of flipping the script, if you will.
yeah.
Sweet. Can you just before we end over here, can you tell us a little bit more about this retreat that you're going to be running?
Yes, I was going to force you to talk about it, even if you didn't ask. So, this is the Pause for Purpose retreat outside of Austin, Texas, February 7th, 2025. So Friday, February 7th to Sunday, February 9th. It's going to be, there's only 12 spots. Some of them are already filled, so I don't know how many we have left. But it's out in Texas Hill Country outside of Austin. We've got the whole place to ourselves.
Is it a ranch? I picture a ranch.
Ranch.
It is a ranch.
It's a ranch. Single or double occupancy. We'll be spending group time. All meals are included, right? Like all the details are included. but group time, a lot of time for yourself, but we'll be walking through these like building blocks of purpose, leaving with, um, a commitment plan or a plan for seeing some of these things through. I would say this is targeted for, I mean, it's really for people who are, um, either wanting to relaunch a career. Like I have a lot of friends who took a step back in their career, had kids, and are now like, well, now what? I want to do something. I don't know what it is. For people who are pivoting a career, and by pivot, I don't mean like you've had a 15, 20-year career and now let's like throw it all away and do something totally different. You can, but there's really a place to, um, adjust and find work that is more fulfilling without sort of, as my friend, I don't want to blow the whole thing up. I just need to do something that I feel better about. This is a place for that too.
Mhm. That's great.
So
And
yeah,
is this only for women?
it's only for women. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. At least this first go around
No. It's great.
will be.
And
Yeah.
right. So it has to be right. Like so, if you want to perhaps pivot your career, but not be $125,000 in debt for going to graduate school, how about a weekend retreat?
Place for that. How about a weekend retreat? Or how about coaching? Yeah.
You might come to the conclusion that I need to go to grad school after, right? That might be the conclusion of the retreat.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Go. I know you're 50, but go get your PhD. That's fine.
I don't know. My dad's about to turn 60 and he is in middle of a PhD. So
Your
Yeah.
dad's. I need to take a pause for purpose with your dad. That's what I need to do. Yeah. Thanks for asking. I mean, honestly, I would love to take people all over the world and do purpose work, on many levels for many different people. This is like our firm's, like, again, Laurel, this is her framework. She's been coaching people on this for 20 plus years. And it's our first foray into retreats. So it's something I'm like just so stoked about. Yeah.
Amazing. Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Well,
Really. Yeah.
wrapping up a little bit, Sarah, just kind of, I mean, we've had a big conversation. It's been fascinating. What are thinking of practical takeaways? Let me just ask the question this way so you can give some practical takeaways. If you could go back to 20-year-old Sarah or 25-year-old Sarah and give her some advice, some practical advice regarding purpose, finding her purpose and meaning at work, what would you say to her?
Yeah.
Top three. You'd probably say a lot, but top three.
I would say know why you're doing something and really be honest. Are you doing it for the next big achievement? Because if that's the reason you're doing it, that's not going to sustain you. So know why you're doing something. Know your values. Like do the work to really know your values, not in like a high ambiguous way, but like do some sort of values exercise where you can get concrete. Um, um, and in my 30s and now I'm 40, um, I'm a big Watts fan, Alan Watts, and he talks about the point of the dance is dancing. You know, like it's not to finish the dance; it's to just do the dance while you're doing it. And so much of what I was doing, like I look back at basketball, and it was about the scholarship. And I loved basketball for much of it, but I put so much value on some sort of end result. And I would really, and this sort of gets back to my first piece of advice, which is like, know why you're doing it. It's like, you got to enjoy the dance.
I love that.
Yeah. And I try to take that with my kids, it's like, I mean, there's times where it's like, oh my God, we just got to do the thing. But being with your kids is like really enjoying the dance and, um, as we're doing it. And that's camping gets me back to that. So you know. I'd say that would be my advice or my 2020 hindsight.
Love that. All right. So finally, what else have you been curious about lately?
I mean, how much time do we have? Um,
1 minute.
okay. I'll tell you what I've been curious about. Um, sorry, is this supposed to be academic?
No, anything.
It's just kind of okay. So I'll tell you what I'm listening to. I'll tell you what I'm listening to. It's A Brief History of Intelligence by Max Bennett. And it's basically how, like, from the very beginning of time, oops, I pressed start on it. How we've leveraged our understanding of not just humans, pre-human brain to create AI systems. And so it's like super dense, but it's this phenomenal, fantastic book about sort of the evolution of neurons and the human brain and how that works in AI. I'm trying to like get on the AI train. Um, so there's that. And then I'm also interested because I have two boys. I'm starting to read on boys and men, why something about the modern male is struggling and what we should do about it. So
Let me know when you find out, please.
yeah, I'll let you. But yeah, so that's that.
Wow.
So
Okay. It's good. You just reminded me that one has to assume that as AI and things being automated becomes more and more prevalent in our society, meaning the question of meaning will become even more important.
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Mm.
You might, or will it leave time for us to do more meaningful things? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely.
And discerning what are the meaningful things. Really, what are the things that we should just let the AI do?
Oh man. Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
I drop in, we leave.
Yeah.
We could chat again about AI or
I know.
and meaning in age and AI. But for now, thanks so much for joining us, Sarah.
Thanks for letting me nerd out on this stuff. I'm very grateful to be able to
Learn
talk
so
about it. And,
much.
I hopefully it comes across coherent and practical. I have a tendency, as I've learned about myself, to get like a little theoretical and not get into the practical. So hopefully I could articulate that and bring some of the high level concepts together. So maybe you can edit that or keep it all. Keep it all.
Argue that that is more okay than people think. People sometimes
Mhm.
think that you have to be very prescriptive and practical, and I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that. However, theory and having a deep conversation about something is also very useful. And what it could do is something even more powerful, which is lead people to draw their own conclusions and be
Mhm.
practical for themselves as opposed to prescribing them what they need to do. So,
Yeah.
So
well done, Sarah. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, guys.